With Warriors Season 3 release date finally coming out, it's time to brush up on some of the biggest storylines heading into Season 3. Today I'm joined by my boy Damon, and we're going to break down the 5 biggest storylines going into the 3rd season. We're going to rank these storylines from least itchy to most itchy, and if you don't know what I'm referring to when I say itchy, click off this video and go watch Warrior on HBO right now. Actually, wait, don't do that. First, watch the entirety of this video and like and subscribe, then go watch Warrior. Hey, I got no shame, man, and I'll twerk for views, baby. Anyways, without further ado, the number 5 itchiest storyline going into Season 3, Zing's revenge arc. So one of the last scenes we get in Season 2 involves Zing locked up in an offshore prison where he's awaiting his death sentence. Remember, he was framed as the murderous Chinese swordsman by Chow and Yong. Now, to be honest, that description of Zing is somewhat accurate, but it wasn't him who conducted the actual murders in question. It was actually Toy. So back to Zing. Zing is locked up and being told to hug the bars in a cell window as the guards drop his food off, and we see Zing discover that one of the bars is loose, implying that there's now a chance for him to escape. Let's just get a quick refresher on Zing's backstory. Zing was originally the right-hand man to Pai, the leader of the Feng Hai. We first see Zing when he accompanies Pai to meet with Mai Ling to discuss a possible alliance with the Long Zi. However, what Pai doesn't realize is that Zing went behind his back and conspired with Mai Ling, and ultimately Pai is killed at the meetup, which results in Zing becoming the head of the Feng Hai. While Mai Ling initially thinks that she can control Zing, this pretty quickly proves to be false. Zing merely used Mai Ling and the Long Zi as a way for the Feng Hai to enter the opium business, and he even threatens her to ensure that the partnership continues. Nobody is safe from Zing. Not rival Tongs, not cops, not women, not children, shit, not even his own people. And speaking of cops, we can't do a refresher on Zing without mentioning his relationship with Bill, our local Chinatown policeman. What starts off as a typical gambling debt owed by Bill eventually turns into Bill working for the Feng Hai in order to pay off his debts. When Bill eventually wants to leave the arrangement, Zing refuses, as having a cop on the payroll is incredibly valuable to the Tong. When Bill says he's done regardless, Zing sends his men to go after Bill's family, which leads to an intense episode where Bill, Lee, and Bill's wife have to fight for their lives. Nobody likes Zing. Not Mai Ling, not Yong, not Chow, and sure as hell not Bill. But everyone is very afraid of Zing. Remember what Chow said about the Feng Hai in general.
You know, they built the Great Wall to keep out savages like the Feng Hai.
So it comes as no surprise when they eventually find a way to remove Zing from the picture, ultimately with Chow and Yong successfully framing Zing as the wanted Chinese swordsman, which Bill is all too eager to agree with. So for Season 3, I'm assuming that we get a Zing return. Obviously, he's still got to figure out a way to get off the island, and I don't know how strong of a swimmer Zing is, but put it this way, I ain't betting against him. Zing got set up for death, so revenge is going to be on this man's mind, and I really don't want to get on Zing's bad side. Remember this savage-ass line he said to Yong?
I'll go and see Mai Ling. I'm gonna fuck her, like she never been fucked. After that, I'll eat her fucking heart and piss in the hole.
Yeah, like I said, nobody is safe. Everyone can get the smoke, and if you thought Zing had nothing to lose before, he's definitely giving zero fucks this time around. So Damon, what are your thoughts on Zing's vengeance as a storyline for Season 3?
Yeah, I mean, you know it's a wrap when we see that loose bar. Zing is just kind of your classic reckless villain. He's got this Joker-esque mentality in some respects, but then you blink twice and maybe he's less intelligent and more brutal once you look a little bit closer. This guy doesn't seem to have any type of conscience, sociopath, psychopath, whatever label you want to give him that gets put on serial killers these days, this guy has it in spades. You feel pretty bad for Bill because you know that Zing's return is going to come at his expense in some way. There's just no way that's going to go unchecked. Storytelling doesn't let you get away with pulling moves that are so underhanded. Look for Zing as a dark horse and playing for a pivotal role with all the Tong factions vying for power. The guy still has some pop to him despite the time on the DL. The question really becomes, is he going to be a hired gun or a loose cannon when he enters the fray here? Either way, he's kind of under no one's actual control and seems to have a vendetta against basically everybody. It would be kind of interesting, we'll mention this more later on, if he were to somehow join forces or to align with Leary in some respect, but that's a long shot pick. However, I would not mind tossing a couple hundred on that in Vegas.
Which brings us to our number 4 itchiest storyline going into Season 3, Leary's entrance into politics. Dylan fucking Leary, leader of the local Irish mob, whose main goal is to ensure that his fellow Irishmen get access to jobs so that they can feed their families. Understandable, right? Except it's not that simple. You see, the business owners are only concerned about profits, so even though they are rich white men, they'd much rather use cheap Chinese labor, even if it means their own people may starve. We see Leary trying to reason with the business owners and politicians, but ultimately it doesn't work. Coolie labor is simply too cheap, and the business owners in San Fran aren't willing to give that up. So Leary ultimately resorts to acts of violence as a means to an end. We see Leary do all kinds of wild shit, beating up Chinese laborers, breaking their fingers, firebombing factories, all in the pursuit of trying to get his men hired. But none of it really works. So when Buckley finally plants the seed that Leary's brute force tactics won't move the needle, it does get Leary to reconsider things. Shit, the man Buckley, my bad, I meant Buckley, does have a point. All the firebombings, beatings, and riots have led to what? The same situation continuing to play out where Leary's fellow Irishmen are out of work. This notion is further encouraged by Sophie, who does agree with Buckley's point. Even though Leary doesn't trust politicians, doesn't matter if he ultimately owns them. Hell, even a Sahm makes a similar point. The white politicians and business owners are the ones choosing the Chinese over the Irish, so essentially they're selling out their own people in the pursuit of profits. And even Leary doesn't have much of a rebuttal to a Sahm. So after Leary gets his fucking ass kicked by a Sahm in the season 2 finale, we see a scene where Leary shows up to a city council meeting and announces himself as the head of the Working Men's Party of California. The man who hated politicians has now become one. How ironic. But it's great for us viewers. This dynamic will make for an interesting season 3 storyline. As a politician, Leary will have to get his hands dirty in other ways. The politician's game is less about overt violence and more about covert manipulation and puppeteering. We know Leary despises the Chinese and wants them out of the country. What steps will he take? How will this affect the warring Tongs? Will Leary be able to handle the subtle nature of politics, or is he just a gangster who will eventually resort to violence and direct confrontations? Damon, you're an Irishman. Talk to me about Leary's storyline in season 3.
Let's see if I can lend a little expert opinion on this matter. Leary, again, another pretty bad guy. However, he drives a pretty good chunk of the conflict on the underside of this show. And just like many HBO classics, whether we're talking Boardwalk Empire, Sopranos, or Atoy from the very same show that we're talking about right now, there's always this struggle to become legitimate, right? Nobody can stay in the muck forever. Everybody wants to try and reach their hand out, see if they can grab a handful and just sort of like pry their way out of this realm. Leary, however, is kind of forced into it. This is the only way he really has influence left to gain, right? That last fight with Sahm told us that his physical limitations in terms of like being able to take on a Tong without severe organization behind him, those days are numbered and maybe long gone. So it's best to just try and take a different approach. It's kind of what he's forced into. I like the arc you mentioned about going away from violence, going into the old-fashioned politics lifestyle, which he despises, right? Leary's character was actually based on the life of a union activist and anti-Chinese racist as well, named Dennis Kearney. The move to prominence kind of was foreshadowed by his interactions with Sophie, right? Sophie telling him he had to get out of there. He had to basically kind of climb up and do his own thing, even as that kind of drove a wedge between them. It's foreshadowing 101 here. The favor that Bill owes Leary is definitely going to rear its head at some point once Leary takes the mantle. I mean, I can only assume he'll have some, at least moderate success as a politician. And it's going to be really interesting to see the working class nationalistic politics come to the forefront, especially with a sprinkle of racism thrown in. From this point, we really only see the rich get richer by manufacturing tension and playing both sides. Leary represents an evil, but like an evil that cares also about the working class. I do think that Leary getting introduced into the politic fold introduces 10 times the volatility we would have had if things would have stayed status quo. So we're going to have to stand pat and hopefully he doesn't burn the place down in the process.
Which now brings us to the third itchiest storyline going into season 3, Buckley's dirty little secret. Walter Buckley. Initially, he starts off as the deputy mayor of San Francisco, basically running the city and having Mayor Blake as the figurehead. But when Blake is killed in an altercation with Penny, Buckley becomes the actual mayor. Buckley is an ambitious bastard. His entire goal is to rise up in the political ranks by any means necessary. We see this in the scenes when he's conspiring with Mai Ling to ensure that chaos reigns supreme in Chinatown, as chaos leads to opportunities for a rise in the political ranks. Buckley has been giving Mai Ling the cheap opium plug, allowing the Long Z to undercut the Hop Way by offering better prices, and ultimately leading to a war between the Tongs as the Long Z are violating the truce which prevented them from entering the opium business. We know that Buckley is a sicko. Remember that when Penny threatens to expose him, he injures himself and blames it on Penny and gets her committed to an asylum. For most of the time, Buckley has the upper hand on Mai Ling. She's a Chinese woman and he's a white man. She doesn't hold the same place in this society that he does, and he frequently reminds her of this. However, Mai Ling is no punk, and she eventually finds a way to get some dirt on Buckley and regain her leverage. She discovers a photograph of Buckley fighting for the Confederacy, which would crater his chances of rising up in the political ranks. As a result, Mai Ling ends up having Buckley by the balls, and she gets him to use his political power to target the Hop Way. So entering season 3, we know that Mai Ling has reversed the power dynamic, but come on now. Buckley ain't the type of dude who's going to sit by and let Mai Ling direct him like a puppet, so I anticipate Buckley finding a way to regain his leverage, but every move he makes is going to be dangerous because Mai Ling can ruin his political aspirations in a moment. Damon, what is good with our former Confederate soldier turned mayor?
In a show full of not so great guys, Buckley may be one of the worst. His character archetype always makes me uneasy. Like Wormtongue in Lord of the Rings Two Towers, or even a more slimy, disingenuous Otto Hightower from House of Dragons. Actually, maybe Lair Strong would be a better comp due to some of the less savory tendencies these two have. I liked how he was kind of undercut by treachery in the same way that he's basically tried to undercut everybody through treachery the entire show. So it was nice to see Mai Ling get some upper hand there. I'm having a hard time trying to discern if Leary's going to be a direct opponent to him or an ally, right? We know they don't really mesh well together because their outlook on how the world should work is not quite joined by the same values of class, though they are both pretty racist. Will they be able to mesh, or are they basically going to have this like bubbling confrontation that then takes over hold over who has control over that part of the show? I would expect Buckley to rise up in the short term, but committing some kind of fatal, tragic mistake that leaves him politically crippled or simply dead.
Which brings us now to our second itchiest storyline going into season 3, Mai Ling versus Li Yong. Now listen here, Li Yong is the baddest man in Chinatown, and on the surface, it looks like he's very loyal to Mai Ling. As of right now, he works for Mai Ling, he's her right-hand man, and ultimately he represents the Long Z. This man's fighting prowess is top-notch, and we see that in season 1 where he pretty much was about to snap Sam's neck. Mai Ling's manipulation skills are top tier, but without the muscle that Li Yong provides, a lot of her threats are going to be empty, man. So she needs Li Yong in order to bring the Long Z to new heights, but there are cracks in the foundation of the relationship throughout both seasons. It first starts with the death of Long Z himself. Li Yong is initially upset that he wasn't there to protect Long Z, but Mai Ling then admits that she was the one who killed Long Z. Li Yong accepts this without much of a protest and dutifully follows Mai Ling's lead, but this was the first example where they weren't on the same page. We then see it again when Mai Ling essentially orders the execution of many members of the Sui Sing, a small Tong that started distributing opium without the approval of the Long Z. Li Yong just wanted to talk to their leader and use words to solve the problem, but Mai Ling had other plans. The excessive violence even gets to Li Yong. Once again, more cracks are forming in the foundation of their relationship. Furthermore, he's concerned about Mai Ling's partnership with the Feng Hai, and ultimately, Li Yong proves to be right. Oh, don't worry, there's more. There's a scene where Li Yong gets Mai Ling to listen to a local Chinatown merchant who needs a loan for a laundry business. Li Yong basically assures the man that Mai Ling will be able to help. Mai Ling then takes matters into her own hands and says she'll give $1,000 in exchange for 40% of their monthly revenue. The man has no choice but to agree, and now he's in business with the Tong. Li Yong is upset when Mai Ling does that, but she doesn't seem to care. The final crack to me was Li Yong going behind Mai Ling's back to conspire with Chow. Neither Li Yong nor Chow like the partnership with the Feng Hai because Zing, as mentioned earlier, is a fucking psychotic madman. So Li Yong and Chow come up with a plan to frame Zing as the swordsman, which I mentioned earlier during the potential Zing storyline for season 3. The plan works, and when Li Yong goes to tell Mai Ling about it, she's not too happy. This leads to a sex scene between Mai Ling and Li Yong, where she ties a rope around Li Yong's neck and tells him to either trust her or leave. Mai Ling is freaky as fuck, yo. Anyways, Li Yong reluctantly trusts her and lets her do her thing. These types of manipulative power plays are used by Mai Ling to try and break Li Yong down. I'm just not sure it's going to be effective for season 3. So Damon, we know the type of force Mai Ling is. but if she loses the support of Lee Yong, she's a lot more vulnerable. What are your thoughts on this potential rift emerging in season 3?
I think Mai Ling has gone to the well a few too many times with Lee Yong. Kind of feels like she's used him as more of a blunt object where he has this stronger moral code, which is where this rift is going to deepen. As Mai Ling asserts power, Lee Yong is going to be left wondering, what am I really following at this point? Watch for Lee Yong to kind of stand up for Mai Ling or end up in a terrible position due to his strong attachment and undying fealty to her. One of the two has got to happen because this guy's just been taking too many chances on her behalf that he seems uncomfortable with. I also can't imagine he takes down Sahm again in combat. I could see a little revenge showdown between him and Zing that ends in like a mutual fatality, or at least like something pretty rough like that, depending on whatever happens with Zing's escape, because those two have some serious beef that will not go unsettled. Whatever happens with him is definitely going to shift the balance of power between the Tongs, though, because he's, their only Sahm stopper, if you will. He's their only guy who can really go toe-to-toe in some kind of pitched combat where, it's a winner-take-all affair. And I think that's going to leave them open to plenty of vulnerability, even with Buckley sort of trying to sandbag the Hopway.
Which brings us to our number one itchiest storyline going into season 3. Unfortunately, it's going to be a Sahm versus Young-joon. This storyline is going to hurt because I love the relationship that these two have. Over the course of 2 seasons, they've definitely become brothers and they've fought and killed for each other, but the eventual clash is imminent and unavoidable. From Young-joon's perspective, there is going to be jealousy towards Sahm because let's face it, Sahm is generally more respected, partly because he's the superior fighter, but also partly because everyone thinks of Young-joon as a brash, cocky, impulsive bastard. And let's be real, they aren't really that wrong about Young-joon. But the two guys really fuck with each other, man. One of my favorite episodes of Warrior was the one where Sahm and Young-joon have to transport a corpse and get stranded in the Nevada desert and end up fighting for their lives there. To me, that episode was the first moment where these two truly fought for each other and bonded as brothers. But this was always going to end up in conflict. Fundamentally, the choice Sahm has to make is a brutal one. His sister or the Hopway. His sister tried to have him killed, but outside of Young-joon, it's not like the Hopway have been super supportive of Sahm either. But family is family, and we get this sense that Sahm would pick his sister if he had to. And speaking of Sam's sister, Mai Ling ends up planting the seed of dissent when she pulls up to Young-joon at the end of season 2 and reveals that her and Sahm are siblings. This obviously crushes Young-joon because he feels betrayed that Sahm would hide this information. And look, we understand why Sahm would keep this matter private, but it doesn't matter to Young-joon because ultimately the question of where Sam's loyalty lies is a legit question. The mural on the walls of Chinatown doesn't do much to help the matter. Everyone in Chinatown is looking at Sahm as the savior, but if we're going to be honest, his arrival in Chinatown has only added fuel to the flame of violence. We see Young-joon look at the mural and spit on the ground. Not only does he have to wonder if he can trust Sahm anymore, but he also has to deal with everyone in Chinatown thinking that Sahm is the savior. Once again, Young-joon is being looked over and not taken seriously. You're starting to see how the seeds of dissent will blossom. For what it's worth, Sahm hasn't really shot down the notion that he has plans to take over the Hopway, and if you look at what his sister has done with the Longzhi, such as killing the leader of the Longzhi, conspiring with the deputy mayor to keep Chinatown in conflict, etc., then we can see the parallels between the siblings and why Sahm is way more ambitious than he lets on. Young-joon's words to Sahm in the last episode of season 2 are very telling. When the time comes and it's her or me, us or them, are you going to make the right choice? So Damon, this is by far our itchiest storyline. The two most important members of the Hopway are on a collision course in season 3. Talk to us, man.
Two friends as close as brothers at one point, and now we have this fracture. This is definitely worth keeping an eye on because I think it impacts the trajectory of what the show becomes. Here we have Sahm, he fits the hero build, he fits the mold, yet Young-joon has the connections in the name. Young-joon often has like this insecurity that's hard to ignore when it comes towards what Sahm has been capable of lately, and this season won't be any different, right? It was interesting to note your point that Sahm basically got hung out to dry by the Hopway after he got beat down by Lee Yong. They've basically used him as a hired dog from day one, so how much can we really trust Sahm to do the right thing by the Hopway? I could see him making an exception for Young-joon because they're boys, but he has no loyalty in general to the organization itself, right? They're more of a tool for him at this point. We saw Sahm start to manipulate Young-joon, especially during the source switch-up incident, and it feels like Young-joon might be tired of second fiddle at this point. The jealousy is often nourished by doubt, as they say, plenty of it on Young Jun's side, especially since Young Jun has kind of shown himself as someone who is easy to be manipulated or easy to be kind of gotten ahead of, as we saw when Mai Ling purposely dropped the fact that Sahm was her brother. She knew damn well that Sahm hadn't told Young Jun that yet. I would expect nothing less than a showdown before season's end, to be honest with you. As much as I want to see these two guys just stay friends and make it all go right, it's really hard to picture a world where that happens. But the Hopway do have bigger fish to fry here with the target they have on their backs. So who knows? They might just band together and go through adversity. But my odds-on pick would be that something messy is going to happen by the end of the season with these two.
Well, that does it. Our top 5 itchiest storylines going into season 3. We now have an official premiere date for when season 3 starts, June 29th, and we're getting 2 episodes on that night. Super excited to see what season 3 has in store for us. I just want to say that this show is still criminally underrated, mainly because the first 2 seasons were on Cinemax, so it didn't get the major platform boost that HBO can give. But as fans of this show, I just want to say it's up to us to spread the word. We got to tell all our friends about this show. Shit, kidnap them, force them to watch it with us. We owe it to the actors, writers, producers, showrunners, everybody involved in the show. We owe it to them to make this show as big as possible because they truly did an amazing job. And I think this show tells an amazing story, and it's important. It's an important story in history. But thanks for checking this video out. If you enjoyed it, like and subscribe. More to come.